Throughout history, countless individuals have vanished without a trace, with their fates being obscured by the mists of time and speculation. The following disappearances lie outside the average case and are the ones that tend to leave investigators baffled and leave us with more questions than answers. The disappearances covered in this video will take us to various places around the world, but let's begin in Alaska. 48-year-old Sharon Bees disappeared sometime in mid to late May of 2014 whilst on a solo hike in the Mount Robert area near Juneau. Sharon herself was a physical therapist that resided in Juneau and was said to be very fit, presumably because she was a highly experienced hiker that engaged in her favourite activity a lot. In the past, she had biked from Alaska to Canada and had recently been on an ice camping trip in Greenland. All in all, Sharon was a bit of a health and fitness buff. Unfortunately though, it appears that Sharon may have relied too heavily on her experience as on this particular spontaneous hike on Mount Roberts. She had failed to let anyone know where she was going. Ann Johnson, a close friend and hiking partner of Sharon's, reported her missing as Sharon had failed to attend a pre-planned hike with her on the 24th of May. The pair were set to hike with the Alpine Club to Hawthorne Peak on the morning of the 24th. Anne told the press that it was very unusual for Sharon to miss a hike as she had never done so previously and was left with a bad feeling in the pit of her stomach. According to the Sitka Daily Sentinel, Miss Bees, 48, was reported missing Saturday night. She didn't tell anyone where she was going and her car was found at 9:30 p.m. on the 24th of May next to the Mount Roberts trailhead. Additional search teams have been deployed and 2 helicopters scoured the area on Tuesday, one over Mount Roberts and the other over Mount Juneau. People headed up Mount Juneau or Perseverance Trail sometimes park at the Mount Roberts trailhead. The area features an extensive trail network and is popular with hikers. Some teams have gone over the expanse, some portions of it repeatedly. The search for Sharon began the following day at 1 a.m. with Alaska State Troopers leading the search. Involved were local search and rescue teams, volunteers, Southeast Alaska dog teams, the US Coast Guard, the Alpine Club, and many of their friends and family. When the dogs couldn't locate a scent, additional aircraft fitted with thermal imaging technology were deployed. Searchers told the press, "We've been all over those hillsides and again assessing where it's likely she's been. We have thoroughly searched that area and then we've searched and double searched areas outside of that, and then search again areas that she could have gone but isn't likely. Even those areas have been double checked." According to strangeoutdoors.com, search dogs are also used but they have not picked up a scent. Dogs showed interest, which is different and more ambiguous than alerting to a scent. This was in 2 different areas on Mount Roberts on Sunday and on Tuesday. Nothing more came of these incidents, however. The search efforts failed and the searchers were left confused as to where she might have gone because there were no clues to indicate a direction of travel. Similarly, animal predation was suspected but no evidence of that was found, which should have been easily trackable. Searchers said that they had no idea where she could have gotten to. 3 months later, discussions were still taking place and this incident was still in the minds of the local population who wanted to know what had happened to her. An expert on Juneau mine shafts came forward and stated that it is possible that while hiking she could have fallen into an old mine on the side of Mount Roberts, close to where she was thought to have gone given the discovery of the car. A man named Brian Weed came forward to lead a small team down into the abandoned mine shaft. He said that while he didn't want to give anyone false hope, there are 2 mine shafts in which Sharon could have accidentally fallen into. However, after an extensive search, it was concluded that she hadn't entered the mine shafts. On the 28th of November 2014, the Fairbanks Daily News Miner reported, "Even after the official search ended, there are still those that look for her to this day. An Alaska state trooper said, 'I just had a guy come up to me and tell me that he was still looking for her yesterday. People still keep an eye out for her when they're on hikes. Sharon's disappearance puzzled everyone who knew her. She was a capable outdoorswoman who had gone on many epic adventures. Her adventures spanned across her favourite summit, Mount Meek on Douglas Island, to the Glacier Bay National Park and beyond. Sharon's case remains open with the Juneau Police Department as a missing persons case. Andrew Brunelli, a 43-year-old experienced hiker, disappeared in the Grand Canyon National Park in early September of 2009. Andrew was a highly intelligent individual born upstate New York on the 30th of June 1966. Andrew would later attend the North Carolina State University in Raleigh and achieved a Bachelor of Science degree in computer science. After finishing, Andrew chose to join the US Navy and served aboard the USS Faris. Andrew was well thought of among his peers who all spoke very highly of him and praised his outdoor abilities along with being a skilled fisherman. Early September of 2009 was not Andrew's first visit to the park. In fact, it was stated that hiking in the Grand Canyon was one of his favourite activities and something he did a lot of, and as a result was very familiar with the area. It's not entirely clear what was different this time and why it had gone awry. On the 5th of September, the Coconini County Sheriff's Office received a call from the Andrews family stating that he had planned a solo hike in the Grand Canyon but that they hadn't heard back from him since his arrival at the park. Specifically, the last time Andrew was seen was at 5 AM on the morning of the 31st of August by hotel staff. The Sheriff's Office got in touch with the park rangers who set up and organised the search and rescue efforts. According to NAStoday.com, search and rescue personnel defined their search zone based on the location of Mr. Brunelli's rental car, his past history of short to medium day hikes in the area, and the lack of a backcountry permit indicating a longer itinerary. By Wednesday morning, all of the high probability areas within the initial search zone had been searched and in many cases researched by ground crews, dog teams and technical ropes/canyoneering teams. It's not completely clear how many people were involved in the search, but it seems that the search was extensive and included helicopters fitted with thermal imaging technology. The search radius was scoured, but unfortunately they couldn't find a single trace of him. This search would continue for 4 days until the discovery of Andrew's body was made. On the 9th, it's not completely clear why, though presumably because of continuous failed searches, the decision was made to expand the search zone. This was despite an air of skepticism that Andrew had managed to hike outside of the original zone. According to NPS.gov, with fewer ground personnel to support, the park helicopters was able to engage in aerial search operations beyond the original search zone. Helicopter crew members spotted the body in a drainage north of the Tonto Trail and approximately 2 miles east of the South Khabib Trail in the vicinity of Patty Boot. The body was retrieved by helicopter via long-line operation and taken to the South Rim, where it will be transferred to the Coconini County Medical Examiner. It's not completely clear why Andrew veered off from the trail. From what I can gather, the trail is well marked and doesn't seem to be easily mistakable. This also doesn't seem to be common behaviour from Andrew, nor is it understood how he entered the drainage. Interestingly, a cause of passing was never released, nor is it clear that one was established. All sources indicate that Andrew's body was sent to a medical examiner for autopsy, but that is where the paper trail ends. The fact that Andrew's body was sent to a medical examiner suggests that the cause of passing may not have been completely obvious. The condition of the body was not discussed either, meaning that it is unlikely that he had simply fallen because that information is normally disclosed and apparent. Ultimately, it's not clear what happened to Andrew that day, and the circumstances surrounding his disappearance remain unexplained. The country of France is the second largest in Europe, and generally speaking, it is difficult to report on cases from other countries whose primary language is not English. Obviously, this is because the reporting is done in the native tongue, introducing a language barrier. However, when a British national goes missing abroad in these countries, we often get reports too, as was the case when David Wood went missing in the French Alps. David was 61 years old at the time and was on holiday with his partner Valerie Armstrong in the Tinny Valley region of the Alps. David was a highly intelligent individual who worked as a computer engineer and was a father of two. On the 2nd of August 2016, David had planned a solo hike in the morning from his location at the village of Marie to a small town almost 4 miles away. I want to make it clear at this point that David knew this area well, and the couple had stayed in the area for 6 weeks every summer since 2010. While David was generally in good health, he did suffer from mild hypertension, but in preparation for his holiday, he had gone on hikes every day to build up his fitness. This planned hike, apparently, is a common one that isn't too demanding on the body and offers some great sights, which presumably explains its popularity. The route runs through a valley next to a nearby river and forest. It's at this stage that things start to take a strange turn. An hour had passed since David took off, and Valerie called his mobile phone to see how he was getting on. He said that he was enjoying himself and that everything was okay, and that he was on his way back and was approximately 30 minutes away. After this time had lapsed, David still hadn't returned, so Valerie called him again. David said that he was tired and had sat down to take a rest, but still maintained that he was about 30 minutes away. This was the last time that anyone would ever hear from David, and every call thereafter went unanswered. Valerie stated he was supposed to be back by 2:30 PM in the afternoon since he had a conference call booked. He had to be back. It is completely odd that he went so far. After David failed to return and was no longer answering the phone, Valerie reported him as missing to the local authorities. The police arrived in good time, and with them came helicopters, search dogs, and hundreds of volunteers. David was seen on the path that he was hiking by a couple on a motorbike. He stopped them and asked them for directions to Marie. The couple said that he'd been hiking in the wrong direction, so they pointed him the correct way. He seemed so confused, the couple said. David's son, Danny, who was 32 at the time, quickly flew out to the area with his brother and stated, if he fell on the path or just off the path, he would have been found. The forest nearby is very dense, and although he's quite an inquisitive person, he would not put himself in any unnecessary risk, so walking deep into it seems highly unlikely, especially as he knew that he had to be back home soon. These areas have also been heavily searched. One theory was that he may have fallen into the river, but authorities stated that it is unlikely that the rivers would have carried him away, as it hadn't rained in over a week and the current wasn't strong enough. After around 3 weeks of searching, no trace of David was ever found. The dogs never picked up his scent, those on foot never found any clues to indicate where he might have gone, and the helicopters never made any potential identifications either. David seemed to have vanished without leaving a trace behind. One theory speculated that because David acquired ear infections rather easily, he may have gained a bad case of that, leading to confusion and dizziness. Another stated that the sun might have affected him negatively, or perhaps that he'd fallen and had a concussion. Regardless, whatever happened here left no trace or indication of what it might have been. It's not clear what happened to David, but nothing has ever surfaced. Roger Bainbridge, who was 67 years old at the time, disappeared whilst on a holiday to Greece while visiting his sister, Maggie. Specifically, Roger had travelled to the island of Paxos and from there went on a solo day trip to Antipaxos, which requires a ride on a ferry to reach the destination. This was on the 26th of September 2013, and it was at some point during this hike that Roger disappeared without a trace. The island is tiny, with an area of 2 square miles, but even so, Roger could not be located. Roger could definitely be placed on the island, as others in the area had seen him and interacted with him. He had a conversation with some of the hikers who walked with him for a short distance. Also, it's not like Roger had never hiked before. He had a lot of experience hiking and was a fellow hiker in the Lake District back in England. The police were notified and joined the locals who were already searching the island. A helicopter with thermal imaging equipment also joined the search, but again, no sign of Roger was found. Roger's son, Ian Bainbridge, said this: "Time is of the essence, we just need to know what's going on. Not knowing anything is scary, we are trying to keep as calm as possible. None of the most likely explanations add up. If he had gone swimming and got into trouble, then some of his belongings would have been found on the beach. It's just bizarre. A year later, Roger had still not been found, and Ian said, "We're no further forward really, it's totally bizarre. We are just totally confused and amazed that we've not heard anything in a whole year. There's been nothing found, no body, no trace of Dad, no credible theory really. We're still left with a lot of questions which realistically in this life we may never get any answers to." It's worth mentioning that officers from the UK also made the trip to Greece to see if they could assist in the ongoing case, but they too failed. This case was described as an absolute mystery and even 7 years later remains unexplained. At this point, let's travel to Tasmania, an island state of Australia. This is where the retired high school teacher Bruce Fairfax, 66 years old, went missing on the 14th of October 2017. Bruce was said to be an adventurous, highly intelligent individual that loved hiking and sightseeing. Bruce adored his dog, Tessa, which was presumably one of the reasons he enjoyed hiking so much, because he was able to do it with her. Bruce, Tessa and his wife Louise planned to hike in the southern part of the country southwest of Dover on the Duck Hole Lake Trail. Louise was in better shape than Bruce, though that was mostly due to Bruce suffering from Parkinson's disease, which he required daily medication for. Louise had a love of photography and walked ahead of Bruce and Tessa to take some pictures of a nearby waterfall. A distance was not specified, but from what I can gather didn't seem to be very far away, and nearby was a picnic area that the pair were supposed to meet at. Parks Tasmania lists the 2.5-mile track as an easy stroll through a forest of stringy barks and rainforest suitable for all age groups. From what I can gather, the trail isn't too taxing on the body and is clearly marked, or rather it is unlikely that someone would lose the trail. Louise, who was taking pictures of the waterfall, sounded the alarm when Tessa caught up to her, alone. Louise waited for a moment, but grew nervous and went to check on Bruce, but there was no sign of him. When Bruce was last seen, she said that he was enjoying himself, was eating an apple and gave her a cheeky smile as she was heading off towards the waterfall. When Louise failed to find Bruce, she quickly called the authorities, who responded to the disappearance quickly. 60 people, including search and rescue personnel, police and volunteers were all over that trail. When the search produced no results, a helicopter was deployed over the area, fitted with thermal imaging technology, alongside dog teams who were introduced into the forest. The searchers were astounded at Bruce's disappearance because outside the trail, walking is basically not possible. Search coordinator and senior constable Chris Williams had this to say: "Bruce is a member of a bushwalking club and fellow members from the Launceston have travelled down to join the search." Duck Hole Lake is a flooded sinkhole listed among Tasmania's 60 great short walks. The bushland around the trail is dense and coarse. You get off the track and it's the type of terrain that you can't walk through. If you want to get through it, you get on your hands and knees and push through it. How Bruce managed to do that is not clear given his age and ailment. It seems that searchers were of the belief that he should have been found. Williams continued, "I'm optimistic about finding him, but as time goes on, it becomes more concerning. Why we haven't found him so far, we're looking into all areas that he should be, but we haven't come across him." Interestingly, searchers came across a partially eaten apple and sent them for forensic testing to see if they belonged to Bruce. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the results of the test. Days had passed and no signs of Bruce had surfaced at any point, and now people were becoming concerned because the longer Bruce had gone without his medication, the less clear he would be able to think. Though this doesn't explain Bruce's initial disappearance, but this was now becoming a major concern. Williams said that they fully expected to find him off the track, but they don't believe that he will acknowledge them. He said hopefully the search dogs pick up his scent and may lead us to a new area to search. This hope was placed in the dogs for good reason. On this channel, we cover these types of incidents a lot, and I'm constantly picking out the cases where the dogs never find a scent at any point. But on average, the search dogs are tremendously helpful in finding the missing. For some time now, I've been trying to find a study on search dog For some time now, I've been trying to find a study on search dog effectiveness, and I finally found one by Dr. Greatbatch et al. There is a widespread and long-standing use of dogs in land search and rescue operations, and their effectiveness is well accepted within the SAR community. However, very little published research exists that quantifies the effectiveness with a realistic search and rescue environment. In this study, they took 10 dog and handler pairs and placed things randomly in various environments and then calculated the success rate of the find. They said that the dogs were 76.4% successful overall with an effectiveness of 62.9%. I'm not actually sure how they're calculating the effectiveness score here because I don't have the time to go through the study, but I will refer to this study in more detail in another video, perhaps specifically focusing on cases where dogs were introduced. Back onto Bruce, Williams vowed that the search would endure until they had a result. However, 3 days later, still not a single trace of Bruce was found, which was just completely bizarre and threw everyone off. Because absolutely nothing was surfacing, the search operations were called off, with plans for small-scale, specialist operations to continue over the course of a week. In the end, there were far more people in the bushlands than just the 60. It's not clear how many, but the authorities stated, "We would just like to thank the overwhelming number of volunteers who have come forward to help over the last 5 days. They have done a fantastic job in searching and researching the area, which also contains some impenetrable terrain." Louise said, "I never saw him again, and we have no idea what happened. Police searched every track and road in the area by car and foot. We searched from the sky using a helicopter, and that kept going until about 10:30 PM. The helicopter had thermal imaging technology and stunningly strong lights, but nothing was found. I explored off track in all the places where perhaps someone could go off to the side, but to no avail." Ultimately, all involved were left baffled at Bruce's disappearance, presumably with a sense of bewilderment at the fact that the search in its entirety had failed to produce any clues. Unfortunately, the results of the analysis of the apple and banana were not reported by the press, so it's unclear if they were Bruce's or not. In the end, it's not clear what happened here. Did Bruce become confused and then walk off the trail and somehow forced himself through the dense terrain described by Chris Williams? Animal predation didn't seem to have occurred here, as that is normally quite obvious to the searchers. This is one of those disappearances where I don't really know where to go with it. I feel that Bruce really should have been found in this situation, and if he was close, then the dog should have had some success. What do you make of this one? 32-year-old British national Stephanie Simpson had moved to New Zealand sometime in 2019 and was living and working in the Wanaka area as a landscaper. I'm not completely sure of the precise date, but it appears that on the 7th, 8th or 9th of February 2020, Stephanie had planned a solo 4-hour hike in the Mount Aspiring National Park, located approximately 40 miles north of Wanaka. She was last heard from on the 6th when she told family and friends where she was going and what she was doing. However, her plans seemed to change, as on the following day she told friends that she had decided to camp out in the park too. This would be the last time that she would ever be heard from again. Stephanie's brother-in-law, Sam Hazelton, told the press Stephanie is very and physically fit. She is experienced in outdoor activities and has already completed a number of hikes. She is such a fun-loving, kind, determined and adventurous woman. Stephanie didn't turn up for work the following Monday and was subsequently reported missing, which of course began the search effort. Thankfully, because Stephanie had told people where she was going and mentioned the specific area, the authorities were able to pinpoint and focus their efforts. Unfortunately though, the press reports of this incident were not very good at all. There's no mention of exact dates, or even what the search effort looked like. However, I have been able to find out that the search consisted of multiple teams, thermal imaging drones, helicopters and dog teams, though the press didn't report specific numbers. During the search, the weather took a turn for the worst, and on the 12th of February, the Mirror.co.uk reported this. The region was hit with heavy rain in recent days. New Zealand police said that 2 hikers were found over the weekend in swollen rivers near the area where Miss Simpson said she planned to go hiking. Unfortunately, the thermal imaging equipment didn't seem to be helping, and the search dogs never picked up a scent, and no clues were found either at this point. The police had been notified though that Stephanie had definitely been in the park, as another hiker told them that she had seen Stephanie hiking there. It wasn't until Friday the 14th when a discovery was made, and we're going to have to get bizarre at this point. It's not specific as to whether the discovery was made by helicopter or drone, but an aerial search spotted Stephanie's boots and backpack seemingly abandoned. Annoyingly, the press didn't report how close these items were to one another, which could prove to be a pretty significant detail. Later that day, Stephanie's body was found around 3,000 feet upstream in the Pike Creek area. Sergeant Mark Kirkwood from West Coast Search and Rescue said there were no suspicious circumstances surrounding Miss Simpson's passing, and it appeared to be an accident. It seemed that she had left the hiking track, taken off her boots, and gone into a waterfall. It's a very hazardous area. We have no idea why she went into the water. This was a heartbreaking disappearance that was terribly reported on by the press, and many questions are left that need to be addressed. Stephanie, for some reason, abandoned her boots and backpack, which presumably had all of her supplies inside. Why? From what I can gather, the average temperatures in February range between highs of 25 degrees Celsius and 8 degrees Celsius. That is 77 and 47 Fahrenheit respectively. Could Stephanie have suffered from hypothermia at the lower end of the temperatures there? I suppose it couldn't be fully ruled out, especially since there were heavy rains in the area at times. However, Stephanie was wearing a jacket, and as far as I can tell was found still wearing it, so I'm not sure that lends itself well to the hypothermia theory, because one would imagine that would also have been abandoned, though again it cannot be completely ruled out. Did Stephanie become delirious at some point, which led her to remove her boots? It's important to note that the authorities had absolutely no idea why she took her boots off and why she wandered into the water. They're not even sure how she ended up in the water, other than theorizing that she went into a waterfall for some reason that they're also not aware of. I can imagine a person becoming delirious and wanting to rid themselves of the weight of the backpack, but the boots seem very odd to me, though I have personally never experienced being in that state of mind. The authorities stated that the area she managed to get to was very hazardous, and that they had absolutely no idea why she would have left the hiking track to go in that direction. Perhaps being delirious could explain why she made that decision, or could another explanation be the presence of a third party, animal or otherwise? Perhaps a sense of nearby danger pushed her in that direction, though that still doesn't account for the removal of the boots. The press also reported that her body had been sent to the coroner to determine a cause of passing, presumably because there wasn't an obvious conclusion in terms of injuries. However, and again incredibly frustratingly, the press, as far as I can tell, never updated with the coroner's conclusions. Ultimately, it's not clear exactly what happened to Stephanie, and almost every single question remains unanswered. John Repka, who was 51 years old at the time, went to Mount Rainier with a climbing team on the 16th of May, 1999. All of his teammates were more than just that, and from what I can gather had all known each other for a very long time and were friends. The group had planned to climb the Moore snowfield, which is 8,000 feet up the 14,410 foot mountain. Things get a little hazy here, but John managed to become separated from the rest of the group, and they weren't even sure how that had happened, but visibility that day was low. It seems that the group had been hiking together, and at some point during their descent, John became separated accidentally, and no one had realised that it had happened. The group did have radios, and John made contact with them, and he told them that he was lost. This was the first time that they had realised he was missing, and they were at an elevation of around 8,000 feet. Reports aren't specific about the actions that the group took at this point. The Centralia Chronicle on the 19th of May, 1999 reported this. Poor weather hampered the efforts of the searchers looking for a climber who got lost in the Moore snowfield while descending Mount Rainier. Weather permitting, the search was scheduled to resume today for John Repka, who was coming down the mountain Sunday when he became separated from his group, said National Park spokeswoman Maria Gillette. On Tuesday the 18th, 33 searchers and 1 helicopter swept the area between the snowfield at 8,500 feet and Paradise Glacier at 6,400 feet. Going was difficult because of low temperatures, wind, precipitation and poor visibility, Gillette said. John is an experienced climber who has been to the top of Mount Rainier before, and he was carrying a backpack. We're all familiar now with the Walla Walla Union Bulletin, and on the 8th of September 1999 they reported this. A body recovered on Mount Rainier is believed to be John Repka 51, who disappeared May 16th after falling behind his climbing team on the Moore snowfield. A helicopter pilot who had been involved in the initial search for Repka was flying supplies to Camp Moore on Tuesday when he spotted clothing Repka was known to have worn, said Ranger Dave Langley. They unfortunately never mentioned what clothing they had spotted, which would have been interesting to include. I would have loved to have known if he had taken his boots off, which seems to be commonplace in some of these disappearances. 2 rangers were later dispatched to retrieve the body. What's interesting here is that the pilot who searched initially had already flown over the area where the clothing was later discovered. That would indicate that John was now found months later in an area already searched by the initial search and rescue teams. Now let's move on to William Tres Tietjen, whose body was held on Mount Rainier for 2 years before it was finally discovered. William's body was actually found by complete accident, as at the time the rangers were trying to find 2 missing climbers who were thought to have gotten themselves in trouble. Thankfully those climbers were found safe and well. Travelling back in time though, to the 20th of June 1999, William was 27 years old. He was highly intelligent and was at the beginning of his career as a medical doctor. Quite literally, William had a bright future ahead of him and had all the hallmarks of being a very successful person. On that day, William began his hike to Camp Moore at 10,000 feet. It was overcast, 5 degrees Celsius or 42 degrees Fahrenheit and drizzling. William arrived at the public shelter at 5:15 PM and left 15 minutes later to snowboard down the mountain. At the time, it was somewhat foggy, but not so bad to the point that you couldn't see properly. According to all, William was an avid outdoorsman, though was not familiar with this particular mountain, and it was at this time that William disappeared. A search similar to those discussed so far was undertaken with professional search dog teams, trackers, helicopters and park rangers scouring the area where William had disappeared, but they found no trace of him at the time. They couldn't locate his tracks nor find any indications as to where he might have gone. Despite the mild fog, he was expected to make it down safely and because of his experience with some amount of ease. When searchers found his body 2 years afterwards, they said that they first found his snowboard and then his snowshoes, followed by other equipment that they didn't specify, and finally they located the body not too far away. Interestingly, the rangers found William's body beneath a waterfall at the edge of Nisqually Glacier at 5,800 feet. There's no real wonder why he wasn't found at the time of disappearance. I can't imagine anyone thought that William would decide to travel to the waterfall before returning down the mountain. I suppose this begs the question, why did he travel to the waterfall? Was that a complete accident? Did he get lost on his way down? Or perhaps there might have been another reason, but I'm absolutely certain that no one expected to find him in a body of water at the time. It's not clear to me if William had simply fallen and was injured, as it appears that he began to undress somewhat as he was found without his jacket among other equipment. Various press sources seem to be in conflict here. Some state that he was only wearing light clothing at the time and some indicate that he removed his jacket. But all are in agreement that he abandoned some equipment. I think that the expectation is that if you'd fallen a great distance and had badly injured yourself, undressing and removing equipment would not be an easy task. It's important to note here though that alongside being a highly intelligent individual, he was also a bit of a daredevil to some extent. According to family members, he loved to ride kayaks down raging rivers, he enjoyed climbing 19,000 foot peaks and even survived a bandit attack during hiking in Ecuador. This, actually, was a point of confusion and frustration for the family, who said that they could not believe that a casual day of snowboarding proved to be his undoing. Later that year, in early November, a dual disappearance occurred. Frank Valenseal had planned to hike and climb the 10,000-foot high Camp Muir with his two friends, Chris Hartonis and Raymond Vicali. The three set off from the parking lot at Paradise, and they were pulling their packs on their sleds. Frank said that they reached the point where the terrain became rocky and quite harsh. Chris and Raymond had smaller, well-designed sleds that were easy to stow on their packs, where his was much bigger that required a lot of manhandling. The three came to the conclusion that Frank's sled was slowing them down far too much to be able to reach the stone hut at Camp Muir. The plan changed and Chris and Raymond went ahead with the intention of fortifying a position for them to camp out at Muir. And then Frank, with his slower means of travel, would hopefully make it after the camp had already been set up to save time. This was the last time that anyone would ever see Chris and Raymond. When speaking to the press, Frank told them that he has a general rule when hiking up Mount Rainier, which he had done many times and had been to the summit on numerous occasions. He said that he likes to gain 1,000 feet of elevation an hour, but his long, torpedo-like affair of a sled was preventing the group from meeting that goal. When the trio were together, his altimeter suggested that they had done around 2/3 of that, and he began to worry about not making it to the shelter in time before it got dark. As Frank continued, the terrain became so rocky that he couldn't get his sled any further and was forced to turn back. Frank said, "I fear that sometime after I left them, they may have made a fateful, irreversible decision of their own. I regret that I was not with them. If they were in a difficult situation, maybe I could have helped." Frank reported the situation to the Rangers, though he hadn't realised that they were missing at the time. Frank joined the Rangers in the search for Chris and Raymond, but all attempts were turning up no results. They had helicopters flying overhead and had deployed search teams on the ground, including dog teams. The searchers scoured the area from the car park all the way to Camp Muir, and at no point did the dogs find a scent. Nor did the searchers find any equipment or any trace at all, in fact, of the missing pair. Days into the progressing search, the weather took a turn for the worst and the mountain was hit with 60-mile-per-hour winds, which grounded the helicopters and forced the ground searchers to retreat and reorganize. At the start of this, Frank and the searchers were hopeful because Chris had hiked to Camp Muir around 100 times in the past, including the route that they had taken this time. Raymond, on the other hand, was an expert rock climber and had been to the summit of Mount Rainier in the past. The weather did get better on the mountain and the search continued. Authorities state that 4 specialized search teams were brought in, though I'm not sure how they differed from the search teams already present. After 11 days of searching, the effort was called off because no clues were presenting themselves as to what had happened to the pair. Searchers said that they were all over that area and they couldn't believe that they weren't able to locate the hikers. Unfortunately, that's all of the information that I could find in regards to Chris and Raymond. I did come across an interesting article by the Centralia Chronicle though. On the 3rd of January 2000, they wrote an article with the heading, "1999 was a frustrating year for Rainier search teams." They state that a record amount was spent searching for missing hikers and climbers in 1999, but no trace has been found of the missing. Mount Rainier Chief Ranger John Crambrink said, "I cannot remember a year in which we've had so many people that we just couldn't find, and it's a real frustration and it's very unusual." That year, the park had conducted 17 major search and rescue operations, which cost them almost $250,000, around 5 times as much they would normally spend in a year. John said that rangers, volunteers and professional searchers were left frustrated time and time again in 1999. He said that they were not able to find so many victims despite intensive and widespread searches. The operations leader for Tacoma Mountain Rescue said that, "We don't like to go up there and go looking for somebody and not get some resolution in one way or another." He then goes on to state that many of the searches were hampered by extreme weather conditions that would roll into the area during the search. He said that over $50,000 was spent on dog search teams in a single case, but that they didn't provide any clues as to the whereabouts of the missing. It's not clear why 1999 was such a bad year for Mount Rainier in terms of the disappearances, but as mentioned, in terms of cost, it was 5 times worse than the average year. I couldn't find anyone discussing any kind of reasoning as to why 1999 was worse than usual, which perhaps indicates that they aren't sure. If the weather was particularly bad that year, I would have expected that to have come up as a possible explanation. One thing is for certain though, the fact that the searchers, helicopters and dog teams couldn't find any of these missing people was becoming highly frustrating to the rangers, who in many cases did expect to reach some conclusion. What was concerning, or perhaps even disturbing to some, was that there was never any trace found during the time of searching. From a very young age, Peng Jiamu was said to have a brilliant, curious mind. It seems that Peng was an individual who had an innate ability to absorb complex information, and he was able to process and reach an understanding in a way that many cannot. Peng was born in 1925 in the Guangdong province of China, and from a young age became fascinated with all things biology. Peng loved life and wanted to understand its deeper complexities, and he gained an infatuation of researching flora and fauna alike. Peng joined the Central University of China, known today as the Nanyang University, and he graduated in 1947, and was almost immediately offered a position in the Shanghai Institute of Biochemistry, presumably because he had already displayed a lot of passion and knowledge about the topic. The Chinese Academy of Sciences also took a liking to Peng and saw his skills as being indispensable, and they would have him join and lead several expeditions to Xinjiang, which is located in northwestern China. Peng's life didn't only consist of success though, and he did face some hardship. In 1957, he was diagnosed with a malign tumour, which he suffered with for quite some time. But thankfully, in the end, his treatment was successful and he made a full recovery in Shanghai. Over the years, it became clear that Peng didn't just have an intelligent mind, but he also came to be a competent outdoorsman as a result of all the time he was spending on these expeditions, hiking, camping, and having to use general survivalist skills. In 1980, the Chinese Academy of Sciences reached out once more to Peng to lead an expedition, and at the time, no one knew that this would be Peng's final trip. The 55-year-old biochemist was quoted as saying, "I have a strong wish to explore the frontiers. I have the courage to pave a way in the wilderness." This expedition would see Peng leading a team in the expanse of the Lopno Desert, located in the Xinjiang region. As you might imagine, this was a largely uninhabitable area with a mostly infertile landscape consisting of sand dunes and a salt-encrusted basin where the Tarim Lake once resided. At this time, Peng was the vice president of the Xinjiang branch of the academy, and this trip would see him lead a team of chemists, geologists, biologists, and archaeologists in the summer of 1980. Peng's role in this trip was to measure the amount of potassium in this mineral-rich area. I'm not entirely sure why this was the case though, or what the goals were. Before his disappearance, he also managed to discover over a dozen new wild species, though it's not clear what they were. Just for some context, Lopno is around 2,500 feet above sea level and covers an area of around 1,160 square miles. The road that the team were travelling was easy going at first, but days into their travels, it quickly transitioned into sand dunes and jagged gravel. The group began to run low on supplies, though the only major concern was water, but Peng was determined to continue on. 5 days after Peng made the decision to continue on the 17th of June 1980, Peng left a note in his tent telling his teammates that he went to retrieve some water, only he would never return. When word reached Beijing, top officials in the central government were said to have been very frustrated. I can actually imagine that to be true too. Beijing's government structure is very top-down heavy, and a culture of punishing the messenger exists there. So people hate being the ones to deliver bad news, as was the case here with Peng. There are a whole range of factors for this behaviour, but one major one is that the ruling party over there hates to be embarrassed, both on the world stage and internally. And they hate others knowing of their own misfortune or failures, which they considered this to be. Upon learning of Peng's disappearance, they launched a large-scale search operation with heavy military involvement and oversight. along with making the investigation highly visible to the public to let their people know that they were throwing their resources at finding Peng. The military put boots on the ground at the location of the group's campsite, and they set up supply lines so that the search could be concentrated for some time. When searches on the ground came up fruitless, over 10 military planes and helicopters were dispatched to fly over the area, but Peng could not be located. 6 police officers were brought in who were part of a specialised search dog unit, but they too couldn't find Peng. It's not clear for how long the search continued, but at some point it was called off and a second investigation began in November of 1980, but as far as I can tell, that search was also fruitless. I did some further digging on this case and I actually came across something that I find to be highly unusual that was reported by the Arlington Heights Daily Herald of suburban Chicago. On the 16th of October 1981, they reported this. Chinese radio and television carried lengthy reports Thursday saying Peng passed away while searching for water. To save transportation costs for the state, Peng started out to find water by himself in 120 to 150 degree heat on June 17. After making 4 large-scale searches through the area, authorities in Xinjiang province found Peng's footprints, his sugar ration coupons, and signs he sat down at a point 6 miles northeast of where he was last seen. It is concluded that Peng lost his way, then sat puzzling on the ground and was eventually buried by strong winds blowing sand. That, to me, sounds very strange. Peng travelled 6 miles. When his search for water was clearly failing, did he not think to turn back? It also sounds to me like they found his final position when his footprints seemed to lead to a place where he sat down and the footprints went no further. Surely a dig at or near to that spot would have uncovered his body if he was there. The reporting also seems very inconsistent to me. The Chinese press reports were saying that they believed that the sand had buried him, but they could still see his footprints, sugar ration coupons, and the place he sat down. Something is absolutely not adding up there. How could he have been buried but not the rations, the footprints and the signs of sitting? What happened to Peng here? It's worth mentioning that the Chinese public found this disappearance to be very strange and they wouldn't let it go. It seems to me that because it was highly publicised and everyone knew about it, rumours began to spring up surrounding Peng. On the 12th of October 1980, the Yuma Sun reported this. The expedition's base camp was in the area of Loch Nur, a nearly dry salt lake and reportedly a site of secretive Chinese tests. Letters quoted in the Hong Kong newspaper speculated that the United States intelligence may have been involved in Peng's disappearance. It's worth mentioning that the ruling party over in China often blame America for things, so I suppose that this accusation isn't too surprising. Or is there something more to the accusations? On the same day, the Joplin Globe reported this. The Hong Kong newspaper quoted the scientists' acquaintances as saying Peng Jiamu was seen September 14 at a restaurant in Washington. It's reported that a man denied being Peng and left quickly. The newspaper said that Peng was seen by friends including Deng Xifang, son of Deng Xiaoping, one of several Chinese vice premiers. The newspaper quoted letters from 2 visiting Chinese scholars, including one who had known Peng for 30 years, saying that he recognized him at the restaurant and later told Chinese authorities of the meeting. That went to places that I wasn't quite expecting and were left with some things to unpack. Before that though, it's important to clarify that the Chinese authorities' official position was that Peng had been buried in the sand there. First of all, I can find no hard evidence that Peng was in Washington on the 14th of September, nor can I find any evidence or mention of him being involved with the US. Though that's not to say that he wasn't, just that I can't find any evidence to indicate that he was. It seems to me that one of 2 things could have happened here, and I make no allegations. Either he was in some capacity defecting or planning to defect to the US and the Chinese authorities caught wind of this and took him from the campsite. Or Peng did go out for some water and something happened to him whilst doing so. The fact that Peng was highly spoken of and held a high position in the academy and was literally leading an expedition doesn't scream to me that he was a defector. I think that his actions contradict that statement somewhat at the very least, but of course we can never know that for sure. What could have happened here is that because the people of China wanted answers in regards to his disappearance, it is not impossible that the story of defection was concocted to change the people's perceptions of Peng, and to make them dislike him because the authorities weren't completely sure as to what had happened and couldn't come up with anything that would appease the public. Of course, I want to make it completely clear that those two scenarios are speculation and we have absolutely no idea what happened to Peng or where he ended up. But his disappearance was certainly unusual to say the least. A big problem when it comes to the ruling party in China is that it is incredibly difficult to ascertain what is actually happening because they are incredibly secretive and hard to trust. I want to make it clear though that I am specifically talking about the ruling party and not China in general, nor the Chinese people. In any case, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this one. What happened to Peng Jiamu? On the 6th of January 2018, Dr. Patrick Cabanel disappeared on the mountain known as the Mortiers Peak at the border between the Pyrenees Orientales and Ariège. From my understanding, this mountain is located in the regional park of the Catalan Pyrenees. The circumstances behind this disappearance are strange, so let's get bizarre. On that January 6th, Dr. Patrick, along with one of his good friends, were both seasoned mountaineers and on that day planned to reach the peak of the Mortiers. The day was clear, and as described by various sources, you couldn't really have asked for better weather conditions in the area. The two men arrived at the summit, which is approximately 2,600 meters above sea level. After achieving their goal of reaching the top, the pair rested for a while before descending the mountain. It was described that all of a sudden, the wind became quite strong, and unfortunately, one of these gusts swept away one of Patrick's skis, whom then put on his crampons to go search and retrieve it. However, after walking off and out of sight of his friend, he was never seen again. After waiting for a while, the friend set off after Patrick and was calling out for him, but he never received a response, and he said that he didn't have a clue where he could have possibly gone. He said that he didn't know what had happened, but quickly came to the realization that something must have gone awry, and he managed to contact the authorities at 1:30 PM that day. It's not clear at what specific time Patrick went missing, so I'm not sure if the friend was able to find a phone signal or if he had to descend first. Mountain rescue were quickly dispatched, taking the Dragon 66 helicopter to the site, where 7 of their best men were deployed on the ground almost immediately. More searchers joined throughout the day, but they couldn't locate a single trace of where Patrick had gone. Reports indicate that the weather began to deteriorate between the hours of 6 and 7 PM. The next report that I found came from the heraldtribune.com, who stated this: after a week of intense searching, Dr. Patrick Cabanel, experienced mountaineer and doctor, remains untraceable. Since the 6th of January, he has lost his way on Mortiers Peak. It was his companion who would sound the alert. Patrick knew the area well, but after 8 days of searching, the hope of finding him in good condition remains tiny. Captain Simon Egler of the CRS Mountain Detachment was somewhat bitter when he said, "For us, it's a huge frustration not to have found this person." He continued, "Despite the snow and windstorm, the rescue units still worked a lot, even if you can't see 10 meters away. We found his missing ski, and rescuers have returned to the site time and time again. We are of the opinion that he has faced an accident, but it is difficult to have a concrete hypothesis. Was he lost, injured, or something else?" Captain Simon also added that many search dog teams were scouring the mountain for him and had been to the place that the ski was discovered, but the dogs were never able to find a scent. On the weather, he stated this: "At the time of the disappearance, there were strong winds present which continued through the night of Saturday and into Sunday. On Sunday, we have a full day of stormy weather to contend with and a lot of snow. We had degradations every day and every night, and nocturnal searches were almost impossible." The Herald Tribune finishes by stating that in addition to the air resources, soldiers were deployed on the mountain throughout the sector where Patrick disappeared, but the searches were in vain. I could find no further information on the actual disappearance, but some outlets reported the discovery of a body 6 months later in an area where the search took place. Mountain Rescue were undertaking a training exercise in the area where they discovered a body. They said that they could not identify the body, but clothing discovered by the police might have belonged to Patrick. That to me suggests that he had removed some of his clothing, though they are not specific other than stating that they found his jacket. The Middle-Ibri added this: "For the moment, there is nothing to confirm that this is indeed the missing doctor. An autopsy will be performed in the coming days to determine the cause of passing and to allow identification." Unfortunately, that's where the paper trail ended, and I have absolutely no idea if this was in fact Patrick's body that they had discovered that day. If anyone is fluent in French and is interested in doing so, then I would invite you to have a search and update us in the comments with a source if you're able to find any further information. Discounting the finding of the body, because I can't confirm if it was Patrick, this disappearance was quite odd in that the friend reported that after Patrick went out of his line of sight, he just disappeared. If Patrick had fallen or something to that effect and was hurt, how and why did he end up removing his clothes? It seems to me that if you had just fallen a great distance, it might be very difficult and painful to start removing clothing. Ultimately, it's not clear what happened here with Dr. Patrick, and I'd be very interested in hearing more from my French viewers on this one, if you can find any further information. I think it's best to start this by citing the Anniston Star paper, who, under the heading of "Reward Offered for Missing Vet," reported this on the 4th of August 1949. A $1,000 cash reward has been offered here for the discovery and return of a veteran Fort Knox soldier who has been missing since the 23rd of June. The missing man, a possible amnesia victim, is Sergeant Clarence D. Lunsway, a member of the Army since 1920. The soldier disappeared while berry picking in a wooded area near the fort. Sergeant Lunsway is described as 49, 5 feet 6 inches tall, 150 pounds, stocky build. He walks pigeon-toed and talks from the side of his mouth. Persons knowing the location of the missing soldier should contact Fort Knox military authorities. I'd never heard of a pigeon-toed walk, but it is listed as a genuine disability. Though from what I can gather, people with the condition mostly are able to live completely independently and without issues. I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page before we got into this. Now, while the first article we picked up there was reported on the 4th of August, the military stationed at Fort Knox had been scouring the area for Clarence since the 23rd of June when he failed to return from his berry picking session. I want to make this abundantly clear, by the way, the search for Clarence was like nothing we have ever seen before on this channel. It wasn't just massive, it was absolutely gigantic and long. The military were obviously looking out for their own on this one, and they pulled out all the stops and spared no expense. They had in excess of over 10,000 men in the area that he disappeared from, and they did discover his car seemingly abandoned near a blackberry patch. The Army authorities stated that apart from this, no trace of him had been found. It seems to me that the authorities may have been getting slightly desperate here when they then offered a $1,000 reward for finding Sergeant Clarence. So who knows how many thousands of people they had in the area after the reward was broadcast. I've had to come back and edit this in, but it actually wasn't the authorities who offered the reward for finding Clarence, but it was actually his wife who put out the reward. But the searches failed completely, and it wouldn't be for another 2 years until the next development was made. Around 2 years later, on the 22nd of May 1951, the Coshocton Tribune reported this under the heading of "Found Soldier's Body, Army Thinks He Passed of Natural Causes." Army officials indicated today that a veteran sergeant whose body was found yesterday after a 2-year search probably passed away of natural causes. A group of trainees ended the long hunt for Sergeant Clarence D. Lunsway when they discovered his skeleton about 5 miles from the heart of camp. Officers said that there was no indication that Lunsway had passed from anything other than natural causes. But the Army's Criminal Investigation Division was making an inquiry to determine the circumstances of his passing. Things are about to take a strange turn now, so let's get bizarre. The area where Sergeant Clarence was discovered was in a remote training field near Fort Knox as the trainees were performing a field maneuver. I would love to know where this area was in relation to his car and the place he was picking berries. The autopsy revealed that there was no sign of a struggle or any injuries of any kind, indicating that foul play didn't seem to be a factor here. This is when a Captain Joseph Schneider, a public information officer, revealed something that he found odd. He said that the area where the body was found had been searched by several thousand troops when he disappeared those 2 years ago. This isn't 1 or 2 people, nor 100, we're talking about thousands upon thousands of people who were in that exact location and never found him. Not to mention, they had search dogs in the area and planes flying overhead. It seems to me that Sergeant Lunsway may not have been in that area when it was initially searched. How in the world could he have been missed by thousands of searchers and well-trained search dog teams? How did the dogs fail to find a scent in the very area that he was supposed to be? Am I missing something here, or is that not just outright weird? Captain Schneider seemed to think it was odd. It's not as if this search was abruptly ended either. He disappeared on the 23rd of June and they still had thousands of boots on the ground searching in late August. And probably beyond that too. What in the world happened to Sergeant Lunsway that day and where did he go? And what do we mean by he probably passed away due to natural causes? It seems completely unreasonable to me that this man could have evaded over 10,000 searchers, search dog teams and planes flying overhead for 2 months, at the least. Unfortunately, the paper trail goes cold after this and there doesn't seem to be much of a follow-up. What do you make of this one? Now, at this stage, I wanted to have a change of pace and I actually found an interesting segment in the Syracuse Herald back in 1931. Unfortunately, specific names of the people involved are not mentioned in this instance, but I wanted to include this here because one of the lieutenants working these cases seemed to want to draw a connection between the two as he felt something was off about them. Here's what was reported by the Syracuse Herald on the 1st of November 1931. There's a strange coincidence in the case Lieutenant Hughes encountered when he found a missing girl berry picker asleep in one field and an elderly man berry picker gone to his eternal rest in another field nearby. Lieutenant Hughes, who operates an airplane with his state troopers, reported the following strange case about a little girl and an elderly man. Just recently, there came a report over the teletype that a 50-year-old man who was last seen going into the huckleberry field near Utica had not returned home. Lieutenant Hughes piloted his plane over the huckleberry fields and discovered no clue. 3 days passed and the usual numbers of missing persons cases flashed through stations, but the 50-year-old man remained dropped from this earth. State police had hunted without avail. Then came a report that a 15-year-old girl last seen going into the same huckleberry fields near Utica had vanished from sight. Here's a clue, determined the state troopers. Lieutenant Hughes piloted his plane over the 6 square miles of massed bushes. He flew low and peered into the wild brush. A rainy spell had held the valley in a dark vice and the case only deepened. Suddenly at nightfall, the flying lieutenant perceived a sleeping form on the damp earth. He had difficulty in landing on the rough territory. Hurriedly, he rushed over to the girl and discovered her to be the missing berry picker. He questioned her rapidly about the elderly man if she had seen him and what she was doing in the field. Strangely, she replied that the last thing that she remembers was picking berries and then she thinks she had fallen asleep. 2 days later, a couple of lads walking through the woods a few miles from the huckleberry bushes stumbled across the body of the 50-year-old man. It doesn't appear that the cause of the man's passing was ever determined, and Lieutenant Hughes seemed to have some sort of gut feeling that the two incidents were related somehow. It looks like while he wasn't actually able to connect the two cases, he was absolutely certain that they were linked in some way. I can't say that I've ever just had the urge to sleep in a field after hiking, but perhaps it was a different time back then. I can certainly see why, at least to some degree, why Lieutenant Hughes was caught on this one. That's all of the information, unfortunately, and it's a shame that Lieutenant Hughes didn't go into more detail about the potential link, but I thought that it was odd and worth sharing. In early October of 1968, Evelyn Roseman, a native Polish woman who had migrated to America in 1956, had planned a trip to Yosemite National Park. It seems Evelyn wanted to get away for a while and immerse herself hiking in the beautiful wilderness areas. On the 16th of October, she rented a car in San Francisco and drove to El Portal, where she spent a night at a motel there. After this, she made her way to Yosemite Village, which is in Yosemite Valley, and spent another night there. She checked out the following morning at 10 AM, drove to Happy Isle, and then hiked to the top of Nevada Falls. It was at some point during this hike where everything took a dark turn. It's not clear to me if Evelyn was ever reported missing, but 3 hikers would come across her body on the 19th of October. The first we hear of this disappearance was from the Marysville Appeal Democrat on the 22nd of October 1968. A woman who apparently fell from the top of Nevada Falls here has been identified as Evelyn Roseman, 24. Park officials said her body was found by a hiker Saturday. Authorities estimated that the young woman had passed away around a week ago. A park spokesman said Miss Roseman apparently hiked to the top of the falls and fell to the bottom. Initially, the local authorities were present at the scene, but the FBI would arrive soon after to take over the investigation. Agent John H. Williams of the FBI would make some statements. The identification was made from fingerprints taken by the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office last May. At that time, Miss Roseman was sent to the county hospital for observation of possible mental disturbance. Or in other words, you could certainly take that as Evelyn perhaps having some troubles at the time. Obviously, it didn't delve into what the problems were, but you can take from that at the time she might not have been completely herself. It seems it was this finding that led the FBI initially to entertain the idea that this may very well have been a purposeful act by Evelyn. However, John was not fully on board with this idea. The identification has not ended the FBI investigation, John said. Although the presumption is that she either fell or jumped from the top of the falls, there are circumstances which require investigation to see if there is a violation, crime on a government reservation. To John's and the rest of the FBI's dismay, Sheriff Norman Garrett spoke with the press and said this. Sheriff Norman Garrett said that he may call a coroner's jury to try to determine the cause of passing, because there are some aspects that need to be cleared up that don't look as though this was a purposeful act. The sheriff would not specify the suspicious circumstances. The Oakland Tribune would soon after reveal what was found. The rules on YouTube have changed wildly over the years, and you've got to be very careful with how you approach various scenarios, especially as they become more sensitive. So, to get the full context, there is a link to a Patreon post in the description below that is open to everyone for free, so you don't need an account. Do check that out if you want to hear the more sensitive information. In any case, the autopsy found that there was evidence of indecent assault. Upon this discovery, the FBI began searching areas of interest at Nevada Falls. The areas being searched today are in the rugged country of the park where the woman's pocketbook was found by a hiker last Friday, and the spot near the foot of the falls where her body was found the following day. Investigation was originally started by the FBI because of some things that didn't add up. Under Sheriff Paul Page explained today. The body was near the bottom of the falls, but not where you'd expect it to be if she'd fallen, he said. This was a very high fall, and without going into detail here, the damage one would sustain from this would be major, and these injuries were sustained. However, the undersheriff also stated something quite interesting indeed. The flesh and skin were intact, which is not consistent with a 300-foot fall. It's not clear precisely what Paul was referring to here. If this particular aspect of injury or lack thereof wasn't consistent with a 300-foot fall, what is he suggesting happened? Unfortunately, we never get the answer to that question. It's also difficult to even begin speculating, because if the injuries sustained were consistent with a fall of this magnitude, but the idea that the skin being completely intact was causing some kind of problem for the investigators to easily explain, then it becomes very difficult. It's interesting too, because it was also said that if she had made an effort to jump, then she still wouldn't have been expected to reach the location that she did. Sheriff Norman Garrett said Miss Rosamond's purse was found at the top of the falls, and the body was found where it would not have been if she had fallen or jumped. This is curious because we are effectively being told that Evelyn's body was too far away from the point at which one could reasonably have accidentally fallen to or purposefully jumped to. This raises the question, could she have been thrown? If so, and as per the investigators' own reasoning, this must have been a very strong individual to have thrown her to the point of discovery. There is very strong evidence to suggest that a third party was present, it's just not clear if it was an animal, or a person, or both. I say this because there was evidence of indecent assault. However, it's also possible that she may have been moved further away from the initial contact point. Was it a person or an animal that did this? If that's even what happened at all. In any case, that's about as far as I can take that discussion on this platform, so if you're interested in hearing more, then please do have a look at the short article I've written on Patreon. The link will be in the description. At this point, I'd just like to take the time to thank you for watching. If you found the video interesting, then please do leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, it helps me a lot. And if not, then feel free to leave a dislike, I'm just looking for your honest opinion either way. I hope that you've had a great day, or evening depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe guys, peace.